everybody. Welcome back to the Simply ICS Cyber. I think this is episode 5. Hi, my name is Don C. Weber. I'm the ICS or the cybersecurity guy.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tom Van Norman. I'm the ICS guy.
Awesome. Well, today we're joined by Kai Thomsen. Is it Thomsen? Thomsen?
Thomsen.
Yeah, so we actually have the digital forensics and incident response guy. So Kai, why don't you help people understand who you are, where you're from, and what you do, man?
Thanks, Don. Sure, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me. So I'm Kai. I am based in beautiful Bavaria, Germany. I do work for a cybersecurity company that only does OT, you might have heard of, called Dragos. Been there for a little bit more than 5 years now. And I lead the global incident response practice. So I've been doing incident response for the past, well, this makes me feel old, 25 years, when it wasn't called like that. I mean, especially here in Germany, it wasn't called incident response until the 2010s. So I've been doing DFIR in mostly industry environments since 1999, basically. Initially 14 years in the steel industry, working for a company that engineers any kind of steel facility, from blast furnaces and electric arc furnaces to strip rolling mills and things like that. So been inside customer and our construction environments across the globe. And then for 7 years, I was in automotive, working at one of the big German automotive companies. So I'm based in beautiful Ingolstadt. So the company with the 4 rings on the hood, that was mine. Done IR on the IT side, on the industrial side, and sometimes in automotive, so vehicle side. And then in 2020, I joined Dragos. Also teach for SANS on the side, been doing that since 2017, late 2017. I'm one of the very few European SANS instructors, and I think the only one still, outside North America and APAC that does ICS in EMEA. That's me.
Awesome. Hey, Kai, one of the obvious questions, this crowd that is with us, while some of them do understand ICS OT, they've listened to a few episodes before, but help us understand, is there a difference between doing digital forensics, because that's the DF part, and incident response? So is there a difference between the IT side, what we would normally see in the corporate environments, in the cloud, stuff like that? How is it different on the control network side?
I mean, the main difference is that, first and foremost, we have all the fancy toys and OT, ICS environments that you have in the IT side, plus a few even more fancier and more expensive and individual toys that are really expensive when you break them. But then we also have this thing called physics, right? And the way if you really want to dumb it down, what's the difference between OT and IT? But apart from that, it is, at the end of the day, you're controlling physical processes, right? You're controlling equipment out there in the field. So knowing what that is, knowing and understanding at least somewhat the process involved, and then first and foremost, knowing how to speak to people properly that really deeply understand how to operate these processes, that is really important. And then, of course, the fun part is you have to be able to get to those facilities. So you have to have all those safety trainings, personal protective equipment, background checks, GRC stuff, all of those things done hopefully ahead of time. So when you deploy to a facility, you're ready to go, ready to work, and don't have to go through 2-3 days of additional training. Or, ultimately, if you have to go offshore, for example, you have to sign up for your helicopter safety training, then that might take a month or 2 or 3. So you're not going to do that incident response next Tuesday, right? So it just requires significant more preparation than on the IT side, and then consequences if things go a little bit out of whack are a little bit higher than on the IT side usually as well. So you have to know what you're doing.
That's fascinating, Kai. Kai, so if I understood you correctly, you only do incident response for OT systems, correct?
That is correct.
And you've worked on enterprise before, early in your career. So in other episodes here, Don and I, we talked about network segmentation. We talked about, difference between IT and OT and things like that. How are how are adversaries or malware or viruses or whatever? How's that getting into the OT space? We Don and I, we talked in length about segmentation. We talked about 62443. We talked about many things. Why not? The pluses and advantages of having your system on the internet, remote access. What's the most common incident that you or your team have today or these days?
Great question. Thanks, Tom. I mean, when I look back, especially at last year, when there was a huge increase in ransomware cases, then mostly it has to do with segmentation and separation. Is oftentimes more conceptual than actual compared to what your documentation or your expectations tell you, to put it very diplomatically. And this, of course, depends a little bit on the industry vertical. So if you have highly regulated industrial environments that are kind of like forced to not just do the GRC side of IEC 62443 or other regulations, but actually have to prove that they've done segmentation separation, they have firewalls, and they are monitoring the environment, yada, 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 then that tends to be a little bit better. And then you still get kicked in the back by that trust between your IT and your OT Active Directory that you completely forgot about and then wanted to fix. But there's some old stuff that depends on, like this 20-year-old account that is in a subgroup that got inherited from IT to OT, right? Your print server or whatever it might be. And that is exactly an account that gets compromised by the adversaries usually. But most of the time, right, especially when you're looking at verticals like manufacturing, which is, of course, so big that it's kind of hard to pinpoint what it actually is. So let's look at medium to small manufacturing environments, right? That, like, especially here in Europe, very prevalent, right? Those hidden champions, those niche players, they're really, really good at what they're doing. For example, they're making some fancy parts for car engines, or they're making like the plugs that go into all your electric vehicles, right? That plug it to the charger, these kinds of things, like the typical, like maybe 2,500 people company makes, but also sometimes high specialty where it's only like 200 and 400 people. Those companies usually have just small enough in an IT team that it's like 2 to 4 people, and whoever started last week also inherited the security role. So they get to do something on a security side, maybe once every 6 months. So they stand no chance, right, to completely overhaul the security posture and procedures inside a company, especially if they're building on a foundation of, say, 20, 30, 40 years of an industrial environment. So then, of course, separation segmentation is really just very conceptual, especially when you're considering how the industrial process and the collaboration between companies changed over the years. I mean, everybody's talking just-in-time manufacturing these days. I mean, again, it depends a little bit on where you are in manufacturing, but especially anything automotives, just-in-time really means that, right? So you have like a 20, 30-minute window when things have to be delivered to the shop floor. So, of course, that requires logistics systems on the IT side to be very deeply integrated with OT systems, right, that control the manufacturing process. Food and beverage, sometimes the exact same thing, right? So grocery stores put in their order Monday morning or probably Friday night, right? And then Monday, stuff has to be delivered. And over the weekend, usually orders come in, stuff has to be delivered and manufactured. So sometimes like your ERP system is directly running on the HMI right next to controlling whatever your food and beverage process is. So that can get quite messy very quickly if you don't have any situation awareness.
Yeah, so it sounds to me like there's some obvious business integration between the IT side and the ICS side, and that normal business is how things are affecting things. The Dragos report, I mean, I was surprised to see that they talked how much they talked about ransomware. I was surprised because we like to think of attacks in control networks and stuff like that. as being these, oh, they're trying to attack the process and stuff like that. But it seems like the majority of stuff is just business, and it's ransomware. It's things to get people paid. That also does affect production. So how much of what y'all's team help with is, on the IT side, the stage, we talk about stage 1 attacks on the corporate environment, stage 2 on the control environment. So is most of the stuff we're seeing just regular malware or ransomware that's dedicated, towards the similar ransomware that you would find in IT environments? Is there a lot of specialization?
I mean, when it comes to ransomware, I'd say, at least looking at last year, there's not a significant amount, or there hasn't been a significant amount of specialization. Where we did see some interesting differentiation between the different ransomware strains, maybe, or different groups targeting you is, you have run-of-the-mill ransomware whose objective is actually to make money, right? Turn organized crime into a big business. So you get that involuntary pen test and securing of your data, right? And as a matter of fact, right, there's not a ton of data usually in your OT environment, so it's more or less of a nuisance. But the hard thing, of course, is how do you decide when you reconnect your industrial environment to your IT environment again, right? Because it's already bad enough if ransomware encrypts most of the Windows portion or other Windowsy operational parts. So the HMI is still not running, right? So there goes your very expensive manufacturing equipment. That is your money machine at the end of the day, right? Whether additional data might or might not have been encrypted is not really, doesn't really add anything to it. So what we don't see there usually is the other shoe to drop, right? Data exfiltration and then trying to do extortion on top of the ransomware, because there simply was no data. So we haven't seen any exfiltration last year. That being said, apart from those, again, where it's already difficult enough to recover and make that decision when to reconnect, because hardly anybody these days, unfortunately, has any decent monitoring of their OT environments. And they just don't know how much is going on. They don't know how much is still flying around their networks that might reinfect them. But then we saw some ransomware cases where it was just destructive in nature. So it might or might have not have been operating in the interest of one or other state, right? Just cause mayhem, especially in critical infrastructure. Regardless of whether you get ransom paid or not, right? That is good. That is in our interest. So why don't you do it, right? Take this ransomware that might not even be able to fully decrypt whatever it does and cause some effects. So some of that we've seen, and overall last year, there was a lot of blending of organized crime, hacktivism, state-sponsored attacks, where it gets all very muddy and hard to discern what is what and who's actually behind this, pulling the threads and controlling what's getting done.
So, Kai, we hear about these large attacks on companies all the time in the news, where there's hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of nodes that have been compromised. Of course, listen to the news. We never hear the root cause and stuff like that. But still, we hear these large numbers. When we go over to the OT space, I know that we have not as large numbers. We just don't have the assets, but we also have many legacy assets. How often do you see the legacy assets being attacked or compromised versus the newer assets? And how do you handle them? I imagine, you come across all flavors of Windows still today, and you got to approach everything differently. What's the biggest difference?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Yeah, our legacy assets getting compromised, yes, all the time, and multiple angles, right? I usually call this tongue-in-cheek DFIR cryology when you're dealing with like another configure infection. And even in North America these days, says the Bavarian, where beer in my country is not even alcohol. It's technically food. Go read the law. So, but configure is 21, right? It has legal drinking age, reached legal drinking age, even in North America. So let's all open one for configure tonight. I mean, joking aside, it's still out there, right? And I mean, starting when I did this really in anger in 2010, right? Responding to cases with the S word, right? That you probably don't want to hear mentioned ever again, right? Whatever might have targeted a certain uranium enrichment facility, and it was all over the place in the steel industry. But a lot of what I encountered there was like, you have these external removal media from contractors and process engineers and developers, and they contain the last 10 years of their project files and the last 10 years of cracks for various pieces of software, and in addition to that, the last 10 years of malware. And that hardly ever gets cleaned up, and nobody in ICS ever throws anything away, right? As part of, if it's really junk, but software never goes to that junkyard, right? Never, ever. You never throw away a project. So you're often dealing with reintroducing really, really old malware into an industrial environment. If you have to, say, update a 20-year-old system or even a 10-year-old system, so you pull out that hard drive where the project files and hopefully there was a development VM, so you're not reintroducing Windows XP Service Pack 1 to your modern industrial environment. But then things start again, right? And we've seen this a ton. I mean, even like we had a larger WannaCry case last year, and even that still does a lot of damage in these industrial environments, where it's also sometimes very, very difficult to patch, right? Because of regulatory requirements, or there's just nobody around anymore that really understands all systems, but they have to be running 24/7. That being said, I mean, we'll all experience a ton of legacy environments starting October this year, right? Windows 10, when it goes end of life. And I honestly don't see Windows 11, given its current state, replacing Windows 10 systems anytime soon. So my expectation is we're just going to increase the amount of legacy in industrial environments by an order of magnitude and still go on complaining, right? But we still can't just throw stuff away. So this will keep on being what it is, but it should be a reminder to all of us, right, that we should take some general precautions around how we interact with these environments. And I'm not going to use the hygiene word here because I hate it, but something along those lines, right? What are your general practices if you interface with very, very expensive equipment? Should always be followed, right? Not just wash your hands, probably.
Yeah, Kai. So I want to make sure that we're looking at our time, and it's, I mean, there's so many things that I want to go down, especially what we were just talking about right there. But I want to give some equal time to tabletops. I think Tom and I are heavily involved with ICS Village. We're trying to get out there and talk to people about some of this stuff, being ready, having those conversations, giving people that training. So, I mean, you're seeing this out in the field. You're going into organizations to help them either prepare or get their first experience with it. So, from a tabletop perspective, for people that have never talked about it, how would you have them start and do a logical progression to be prepared for incident response?
Yeah, thanks, Don. And this is near and dear to my heart. I mean, not only as we're recording this and we're seeing ourselves on a video. I mean, Leslie Card, you all know her, right? Part of my team, calls this a revenge of the nerds. So I'm pointing out all the role-playing games rules books that are still on my shelf in my office. So yeah, Revenge of the Nerds. We're the guys that played role-playing games in high school and university, and now tabletop exercises are a way of getting back to everybody else, and I have to play a role-playing game. You're welcome. And we could end it there and still have a good time about it. But I mean, honestly, right, this is really important. If you don't exercise, especially outlier things that you don't do all day, then how are you going to get any good at those, right? You never. And I mean, anybody else that has responder in their job title, so soapbox moment coming up, bear with me, exercises whatever they're supposed to be doing in their response role until it comes out their ears. for some reason, still in a lot of organizations, it's changing, thankfully, but depending on where you are in the world, we still think that if you're an incident responder, if you're a cybersecurity organization in your company or federal organization, you don't really need to exercise this, right? It's just whenever it happens, you pull out the incident response plan.
Magic.
And then you find out the hard way that you don't know how to read this, and you don't have time to read 100 pages right now, and you have no idea what you're doing. So you're setting yourself up for failure. How do you get started in this? So how do you stop, right, and start doing what makes sense and exercising things? Well, just start very, very simply by asking yourselves what if questions. So what if, like Friday, take a Friday, get in some pizza, have an early end to the day, but over pizza, you pull out your incident response plan and you start talking about what if scenarios. So we call this at Drago's rehearsal of concept exercise. It's very, very simple. You don't really need a big planning time. Just like, what if at that very expensive $6 mill that we just bought, right, and took 2 months to set up and is now finally running, what if at the HMI a ransomware notice appeared? What would we do? Like, who would call whom? I mean, start there, right? And then follow the steps in your incident response plan if you have one. I mean, if you don't have one, still try to figure out what if, right? And just do this for 30 minutes while still munching on your pizza. And that gives you an initial idea of how you could cope with something as an organization.
You know, I mean,
sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
That's one of the things I try to point out whenever I'm teaching is, you know, I like to remind people, it's like, you know, I ask them, hey, who's in charge of the incident response? And, you know, people start saying cybersecurity team. I'm like, no, it's the person that's responsible for that OT side. They're responsible for the incident response. And they need to be, first of all, they need to realize that they're in charge of it. Also, they have to be willing to accept input from other subject matter experts. So how's your team finding some of that interaction when they're going in?
Spot on. And yeah, I mean, again, it depends a little bit, the typical consultant's answer, right? It always depends. It depends a little bit on whether they have any actual experience with OT or not. So two scenarios are prevalent here. Either you get actually pulled in by somebody on the OT side, so you don't have to do all of that preliminary education on why things are different. The other type of scenario is the CISO from the IT side just won also his responsibility for being in charge of OT cybersecurity. But of course, they have no idea about OT, so they come with their IT preconceptions. They think they don't need you really. They don't need to do anything different. They do things like they do them on the IT side. OT might be a little bit wary already, and then we get called in to help them like get to some point. But you now have to deal with a ton of preconceptions from the IT side. And I usually compare this to all of our favorite movie, right? Everybody loves that one, the documentary that you always see on Christmas Eve, right? About that officer that saved the day at Nakatomi Tower, right? Die Hard, where Agent Johnson, and Special Agent Johnson from the FBI waltz in, and like, this is an X-15 or whatever scenario, we know how to deal with it, and everything goes crashing down in flames, right? And that is usually when IT waltzes in, does something on the OT side with the IT playbook. That is how I usually try to explain this, a little bit tongue-in-cheek again, but we've seen this numerous times, and things go really, really badly. So how do you play through that in the scenarios? One of the simplest questions that always stops most of our customers is asking them, who is the authority to declare this side shut down or declare this side disconnected? And then who has the authority to reconnect that side? Might not even be the same person, but even that will require them sometimes weeks of research, right? It's not a straightforward answer, because usually when you're talking about shutting down the money machine, it goes all the way up to the hierarchy, all the way down again. Then again, depending on your company culture, there's some debate on the lower levels. People are really, really, really afraid. Again, think back to Die Hard when they asked that poor guy to shut down the electricity for the whole section of the city, right? So the question goes up again and then comes down again as a reply. Do it, do it, do it, right? But you're now 36 hours later. So you lost some really, really valuable time, and you're still unsure of what to do when you reconnect again. So you're going to lose another couple of days, if not weeks, at the tail end of the incident. So these are the simple things. So I'm not even going to the extreme of how do you get people offshore if there's something at an offshore facility? How do I get people into a nuclear facility, for example? These kinds of things, right? things that we operate in from time to time that make great screenplays for Hollywood movies, but not necessarily, right, your run of the mill. But everybody here that runs OT, right, asks those simple questions: who has the authority to make the decision to basically stop our business and then turn it on again? That's going to be a hard nut to crack to begin with, and that needs to be in your incident response plan.
Kai, that's really good point there. And you know, when we go and we do the tabletops, that's one of the things that we throw out. And you know, when we do tabletops, we're getting together with 20 or so random people, so it's easy for us to assign that responsibility to someone. However, in real life, yeah, that's a little more difficult. Nobody wants to lose their job. However, the decision needs to be made, and I'm not going to make it. I'm going to make Don make it. Well, it's really not Don's responsibility either, or maybe it is. It's one of those things that you are correct. It has to be figured out before the incident. Kai, when you go on site to do for an incident response, where's your work normally taking place? Is it out on the plant floor? Is it in some server room? And if you are in the plant floor versus server room, or server room versus plant floor, what do you have to be aware of? You know, there's safety precautions on both. There's you know, you just can't walk into a plant floor or walk onto the plant floor. You also can't just walk into a server room. So, you know, everybody's saying about the safety hazards and, you know, the different things you have to do for a plant floor, but what's your typical day? What do you have to do?
Yeah, thanks. It often starts remotely, right? So you have a call initially to the hotline where we determine, at least like in a nutshell, what's the TLDR of what might be going on. Then we have a triage call and we talk a little bit more at length, like an hour or two, about the actual case. And oftentimes, of course, it's like on the IT side, right? Customer making assumptions about what's going on, which are, of course, entirely unrelated to what actually might be going on. But that is also when we walk them through the set of questions on, hey, do you need us on site? Where do you need us on site? Like, where in the world, literally, going through whatever was recorded during onboarding with them, what we have in our documentation about that particular customer. So what's the PPE required? What are any safety certifications required? What is any like preliminary GRC compliance training that we might have had to do? Is that still valid? Yada, yada, yada. And then when we do deploy, is again going exactly through those motions. So making sure before we deploy, so it's a little bit more like if you're standing up a rapid response force in the military, where rapid is relatively, right? Usually rapid response means not quick reaction force, but like 72 hours. So I mean, we might send an initial team, right? An initial individual first, right? To figure out if the customer doesn't really know what equipment is there. So what connectors and cables and forensics collection software might we need to deal with that Windows NT system that still controls the truck scale, that if it doesn't run, right, no truck leaves the premises, these kinds of things. So try to figure out as much as you can ahead of time, but I mean, once the clock's ticking, right, if you can get away with it, send a initial away team, figure things out on the ground until you get in the larger team, and also fly in some ship kits that you can carry in your carry-ons, like all the equipment that you need. So there's significantly longer ramp-up time to prepare for this because there's more logistics required and there's more safety requirements. And then when we're on site, so again, it depends a little bit on the nature of the case. I mean, similar to any other type of crisis response, if there's one case, right, then forward deploy as closely to that case as possible. So usually, yeah, ultimately at the affected site on the shop floor, if it has to be. And then, of course, follow all the safety regulations of that and make sure you listen to people properly, like where to move, how to move, walk between the yellow stripes, right? Hold on to the handrails, all these things, right? If I see my team not doing that, and we'll have a conversation. If you repeatedly don't do that, you're not going to be on the team. If there's multiple sites affected, right? There's multiple cases, and usually you deploy to wherever their incident commander is, and then they will tell you where to go first, right? It depends a lot on the nature of the beast. more often than not, if we deploy this directly on site, so plant, facility level, moving around the plant floor, the shop floor, along a large industrial environment, just depends on the industry vertical. So sometimes that can be really touch and go, like a petrochemical facility. Sometimes, I mean, in automotive, the shop floors are so clean you could eat from them. So that is really comfy. Steel industry, not so much. That tries to kill you. Everything in there tries to kill you. So you really need to know what you're doing.
Hey, Kai, we're right at 30 minutes. There's one thing I want to, and we can end on this. I think what's going to be going through a lot of people's head is, how do I start? If I don't have OT experience, can I even start thinking about being on your team or another team that does this? What would be your recommendation if somebody wanted to start doing this, start moving to in this direction right now?
So if you're currently not at a company that has OT equipment, then I would try to find a job at an OT company, right? At any company that runs an industrial environment, and even take a low-level job, even if you're already further advanced in your career, on the OT side. Because frankly speaking, OT requires a lot more knowledge. Oftentimes, especially if you're a process engineer, that is many years of studying at university, right? But there's a lot of stuff you can just pick up from low-level jobs, learning how these things are programmed, right? Like what ladder logic is. Also learning the ins and outs of certain industry. And there's a lot of practical knowledge and law that gets like transmitted and translated from generation to generation, passed on. That is really important to be embedded in that organization, right? There's only so many YouTube videos you can watch on that still don't help you to really get embedded into that. So really get started and like immersing yourself into an OT environment and learning, asking a lot of questions, and then feed that back into IT, right? And this is how you get started in your career, right? The cybersecurity portion of it is, frankly speaking, takes a lot less time to learn. I mean, it still takes a lot of practice, but the OT side, the sooner you get started on that, the better. This is usually what we watch out for: more OT experience than DFIR experience. I mean, for the DFIR stuff, there's SANS classes. For the OT part, right, that is, again, requires a lot more hands-on knowledge.
Yeah, harder
definitely ways to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Tom, your last thoughts, sir?
Kai, it's been great hearing you, and hearing you talk about the DFIR in OT. I know I'm always interested about this. Working on a plant floor is, how do we recover? Not just from the reloading the programs and everything, but we could have hundreds or thousands of different machines. It's always interesting to hear, the processes and methodologies that you need to go through that. Thank you for joining us today. Always glad to have you.
Well, thank you both. Great time being with you again. Thanks for having me. Anytime.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. Have a great evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.